everyone. I'm so glad to have you here today on my channel. I'm Nikki of Nikki Hearts Cards if you haven't seen my face before. And today we are going to be doing a video about the tools you need to create a card. And I labeled this as beginners because I'm going to go through enough tools that you would make a complete card. So if you're just starting out and you're making your holiday list, this will give you some ideas. But I'm also here for all the rest of the card makers. These are some of my favorite tools. I'm going to go through some budget-friendly items, and I'm going to go through some that are splurge-worthy and why you might want to invest in them. So these products have not been given to me. They are all things that I use in my craft room on a regular basis that I have purchased. I have been using every single item in this video for at least a year, sometimes multi-years. So I'm also looking at the longevity of the products and that they'll stay around with you forever, hopefully, maybe not forever. But I want everybody that is excited about card making and interested in it to know what they need to get started while they're making their holiday gift guides, and also just so that you know that it can be done on a budget. A lot of times it is, when you see things on Instagram and all this, it's all these new products and you're not really seeing what goes in the background of how you made that card and what kind of tools you actually need. So I wanted to create this guide to help you get started. Card making is a great hobby, and it is something that makes a lot of people happy. It also helps you share kindness and joy through Happy Mail. So I want to help you and guide you on that journey. So make sure that you hit the like, notifications, and subscribe button so that you catch the rest of this beginner series if you need to, or just so you get to check out my other videos. I have videos on this channel from beginner to advanced, so I've got something for everybody. Let's get right into this video. So we're going to start with the logical place of, if you're going to make cards, you're going to need to cut things. Whether that be paper, cutting around stamps, you need something. I like to start with these little bitty Tim Holtz scissors. I know there are other small scissors out there, but I really like those. And then these Scotch that are from Costco. So the difference in price here is that one is about 20 bucks and the other one is about $4. I'm going to show you cutting out with these scissors and kind of point out some differences to see what may make more sense for you as a crafter and your budget. Scissors, to me, a lot of times it's personal preference. You know, if you like little bitty scissors to cut out these images, they're going to cut out no matter what scissors you have. I kind of measure mine based on how comfortable my hand is in the scissors, and I know a lot of people will use some other brands of small scissors, but I'm only showing you things that I use all the time. I've had these scissors for probably 5 years. They're still sharp. They cut teeny little points, but I'm going to show you that you can cut those same points with these $4 scissors. So these are about $4. If you bought them alone, they're probably around $9. And so not a huge difference. They're definitely clunkier in your hand. One thing that I notice when I'm cutting out stamps with them is that the blade is so big, sometimes I have to angle my paper differently to make a really fine cut. But they do have a pretty comfortable grip and they cut well. So the little scissors to me sometimes are a little more uncomfortable when my hands are hurting, and I do a lot of crafting, use my hands a lot. My job used my hands a lot. So I feel like I have a little arthritis, but look how teeny of a point I can get. I can pretty much get the same point with these huge clunky scissors as I can with the other ones. So I'm going to show you cutting out some waves, like if you're cutting around a flower. I really don't see a huge difference. The big clunky scissors are heavier for sure, and you can definitely see around your smaller scissors, but this is not something that I would break the bank on right now. I would just do what you can, especially if you're on a budget. If you don't have a budget, I will tell you my Haberdashery scissors, which are those tiny ones, have lasted at least 5 years. So they're still sharp, they don't need to be sharpened, and my Scotch scissors tend to wear out a little bit faster. For me, I'm not going to break the bank on my scissors. If you have a limited budget, just go with your cheap scissors. So what I would spend more money on is a larger paper trimmer. This is what's called a guillotine type trimmer, and that's because it just slices things off. So do not get your fingers there. It's really good about protecting your fingers with that plastic piece. And this is so big, it's 12.5 inches long and width, which I'll show you how you add width to this. So I can't fit it in my screen very well. So sorry about that. I can't get a super close up without cutting off part of this, but I do want to show you how it cuts. it stays sharp. That blade, I've had this one also for probably at least 3 years, and you do not have to resharpen this. They are self-sharpening, and so that's very nice when you're cutting a lot of paper. What I use a paper trimmer for mostly is my layers. So layers, card bases. This has a little ruler that you attach to the side if you're cutting 12 by 12 paper, so it just kind of clicks in and you can measure your cuts, which is really nice. I used to be against a guillotine trimmer. I was really used to just like that cheap Fiskars slide trimmer, but once I got one of these, I realized that this is one of my most used items in my craft room. So a guillotine trimmer to me is best for making card bases, making layers that are straight cut. It also cuts pretty small little sections. So I'm going to show you how fast this does. It really works better to do it quickly. So you don't want to hold your paper and slowly guillotine it. Think about how fast a guillotine comes down. If you're thinking in the sense of old-time guillotine, you hold these plastic pieces and hold your paper, and then you're going to make a quick cut, and it's just amazing how accurate that is. So you get a nice clean edge and it cuts your paper. This is if I was making card bases. I can also use it to make very small pieces, so probably about 1/8 of an inch. It's actually maybe even a 1/16 of an inch here is how small you can make a little cut, which is very nice if you're making stripes or if you just need to cut off a small area because it's not quite fitting on your card. And this guillotine really works well for super heavyweight cardstock too. So I use a pretty heavy card weight as my base for my cards, and so cutting that off with just a little trimmer is sometimes difficult. So this tool has so much stuff. Once again, it's a huge tool. It takes up a lot of space. So if your space is limited, neither of these would work for you. But the guillotine trimmer does come in a 6-inch, so you could always do that. This one, it has one of the slide cutters. It's called the Works, and it's by We Are Memory Keepers. It is huge, and it doesn't just trim paper. It has so many uses. So if you're into other crafts, definitely look at what all this can do. I do like that it has a scoreboard right here, so I tend to use this for my smaller layers if I really need to look at where I'm cutting. If I'm cutting in between lines or something like that, it's nice to have that clear look through that I can see. But on heavier weight cardstock, these blades do get dull, and you can see my blade is a little bit dull. So this is a heavy 120-pound cardstock, and sometimes I will get not the cleanest cut with this, although it'll be straight, but it's nice that you can measure and cut very small 1/8 inch areas here, which is nice. So the other good thing about this is that it has a scoreboard. And what in the world do you need a scoreboard for? Well, if you're making your card bases, you need it to make these indented lines so that you can fold your card easier. So it comes with a lot of extra options, and it may be good for someone starting out just because it has so much. It's got a punch board, it's got a way to make envelopes, it's got ways to make tassels. It's just, like they say, the works. So this is a very expensive tool at around $90, whereas the guillotine is probably around $70 at the 12.5 inch. The 6.5 inch is a lot cheaper. So a paper trimmer, a good one, is definitely going to cost you money, but you're going to use it all the time. Next, you're going to need something to cover your workspace. This is probably the cheapest option. It is a craft mat, and I will of course link everything in the description. Sorry for all the tape here, but it's well used. As you can see, I probably had it for ever, I don't even know, for a long time, lots of years. And I use this when I'm coloring with inks that are terrible about staining. So alcohol inks are one of them. Some of my inks that I use just to ink blend, if I can't get them off another mat, I will use these. But it is like I accidentally cut through it one time, so I need a new one really, but it can be cut through. It's slick and it's easy to ink blend on, but you just need to make sure you can tape it down somewhere without hurting your surface. This craft mat is probably around $20. The next one that I use all the time is the waffle flower media mat. Now, lots of companies have started making these silicone mats. I like that it rolls up and that it doesn't have to be taped down. The silicone just kind of sticks it to the area, and it has this, I'm trying to show you without shaking the camera too much, but it doesn't move. It does stain, so you wouldn't want to use alcohol inks on this, and even some of my other inks would be a problem. It does hold water, super great for watercoloring. You see that you would have to dry that up. It's not going to fall off of the mat. It's in almost like in a little well here. So it gives you lots of options to blend inks. You even have that little palette over to the left that you could add your inks into and watercolor. I love it for ink blending. So if I'm going to take an ink pad and blend on paper, it's not going to mess this up. Like I said, occasionally I'll have one that stains it, but I've just kind of grown to like my little pink stains up there. So it wipes off very easily and it gives you lots of room. There are new ones out. I know scrapbook.com has a new one that's really big. I would love to get my hands on that, but it's just a great option. So some kind of silicone mat. This mat is about $35, and the craft mat that we looked at before was around $20. So they're definitely different in price, and they are used for slightly different things. You can't use the alcohol inks on the silicone mat, but you can use anything on that craft mat. So it just kind of depends on what you're going to be using. So we've covered cutting out things, cutting card bases, and what kind of mat you need to cover your area. Now we're going to look at black inks, and these have different uses. I'm going to tell you about, they're all pretty similar in price, around $8, but I'm going to show you, depending on what you're going to do with your card making, what you might want to invest in for ink. So we're going to start with these two. I'm going to stamp so you can see how black they are, because to me, having a very dark black ink is very important. You also want one that can do great details if you're going to be coloring in stamps, and depending on what you're coloring with. So there are only certain inks that you can use with the alcohol markers. So alcohol markers are called Copic markers. When you see somebody coloring in little critters, a lot of times they're using an alcohol marker, so you need a specific black ink pad for that. Let's start with this Memento Tuxedo Black. And remember, all this will be linked so you don't have to keep up with what these are called. Memento is the ink that a lot of people use to use alcohol markers. It's a very dark ink. It is nice for pretty much any technique. It's a good, basic, all-around black ink. I'm going to stamp with this flower, and we're going to use an acrylic block. So we'll get into acrylic blocks in a minute, but this one is about a 3.5-inch acrylic block. It's wavy. It has lines, so I can line up my stamp and I can see through it. So this is one of the cheaper ways to use your stamps. So I'm going to tap this on. One thing with using an acrylic block, and we'll talk about this later, is that you get one chance. It's really hard to line that up again. So you want to have a good dark ink. You want to make sure you've got your entire stamp covered. You see how I double check and make sure I've got all of this taken care of. And then we're going to push it down on the paper with some firm pressure. So I'm sorry if I'm moving the camera a little bit, but I do use a lot of pressure. So I'm pushing down on it. I like how this acrylic block can be gripped. It's very nice. And it gives you a nice image that dries pretty quickly, so you can start using your alcohol markers. This VersaFine that we're using to the right is another black ink. What I love it for is exactly what it says, fine details. So this one you cannot use the alcohol markers with unless you are extremely careful. I would not suggest doing that because it can bleed onto your alcohol markers. But this ink is dark. It's really great at getting fine detail of the flower. So I'm making sure I've got it completely covered, and then I'll let you see if you can tell the difference in this stamp versus the other. It's subtle, it's darker. To me, you can see those fine details even better with this one, but it's not anything crazy different. So I use this a lot of times for fine word sayings, like if I've got a little sentiment that's going along the edge. This is really nice to get all those individual letters and show you the sentiment in better detail than some other black inks. Next, I'm going to show you my favorite black ink for stamping a sentiment, especially if it is a really thick font. So this is a Merry Christmas stamp from Gina Designs. It's got a pretty thick font. It's very detailed, and I love using this font on the back of my Christmas cards. Like, I'll put it on the outside of the envelope, and I only want to stamp that once, so I'm not having to mess with it. So if you're going to stamp once with a black ink and make sure that you get all of this covered, this ink is what I love. It's called VersaFine Clair Nocturne, and it is a very dark black ink. Can you see how well that covers? And let's compare this to our other two black inks. This is still one you can't use with alcohol markers, so it's not my go-to for stamping an image. It's my go-to for stamping a sentiment. Okay, and check how dark this is. So I did add some pressure, but just great coverage, very dark. It looks really good. I did it on red and green envelopes last year. You could see it perfectly fine because it's a very dark black, and I just love having a super dark black. So I'm going to show you with this same sentiment in the Memento and the VersaFine, so you can compare the difference of the color of these. Like I said, they do have different uses. The Memento, if you're going to be getting Copic markers and starting to color, then it's definitely your go-to for that. But let me show you what the difference is if you had one ink pad, so that you know what you're going to do. And I love doing a big sentiment on a card, especially as a new card maker. If you just do a background and then put a big sentiment on the front without having to do too much coloring, it's really an easy way to get started in card making. So you can see that is a more, it almost looks like a dark gray compared to that super dark black Nocturne. And let me show you with the VersaFine the difference in the color and the detail. You're doing different inks, you want to make sure you clean your stamp off really well too, so that you're not mixing these and getting other inks on the ink pads, because they do have different properties and that can mess up your ink pad. So I cleaned it off really well with a damp rag, and then you always want to make sure it's good and dry. Sometimes I'll use a microfiber or something like that just to make sure I don't have any puddles of water in between the letters. Here is the VersaFine. So like I said, this is for fine details. I think it's a darker black than the Memento, but it's not quite as dark as my top Nocturne, which actually those are technically the same company. But you can see the difference there. Let me show you how that one matches Memento. And then we've got the VersaFine on the other side. And then look at these up close. Can you tell how dark that is? I just love it. So like I said, 3 different black inks, different uses, kind of depends on how you're going to be making cards and what you're going to be using. But all of them are great, and they're pretty similar in their price range, probably around $8 or $9 per ink pad. Now we're going to use acrylic blocks, and these are blocks that you put the stamps on. So you've already seen me use the round one. Now I'm going to show you this larger one that's about the size of a card front, and it's pretty heavy. So this is my favorite block. I don't stamp with it as much as I do use it for a paperweight and just to kind of make my paper flat when it's warping a little bit. They're both great, and you could do an entire front of a card on the big block if you wanted. I don't feel like you need tons and tons of different acrylic blocks. Just a couple of sizes will help. Then if you're looking for the splurge worthy, last a really long time product, this is what I would recommend. It's called the MISTI. This is what's called a stamp platform, and so you rotate the door back and forth to stamp, and you've got these really heavy duty magnets that will hold your paper down so the stamp doesn't get stuck to the paper and then pull it out of place. This is a great way if you're doing lots of cards at one time, if you're lining up layered stamps, something that you need to be very precise on. This will really up your stamping game. Now you can stamp layered stamped images or anything with an acrylic block. That's perfectly fine. But this for me makes it quicker and more accurate because I can stamp this multiple times. I can just line my paper up in the same spot and stamp the stamp, which is very nice, especially if you're mass producing cards. So I really feel like it's worth it. I'm going to go through and do a layered stamp. These inks right here come in a 4-pack. And they're from Altenew. Altenew, I would say, is probably the biggest company in layered stamps, especially layered florals. And so they have ink specifically for this, and their stamp sets, you know, they have information on how to use them, but generally you start with your lightest color as the base and you go up through the layers. So I'm going to show you one layer. Once I've got this one done, the nice thing about a MISTI is I missed a couple of petals. I wasn't looking where I was stamping, so I can add another layer of ink. This is also nice if you only have one ink, because you can create more colors by doing one layer and then even changing things up and doing the second layer in the same color. You've got lots of options with your stamp pads. So the MISTI to me is probably my second most used tool. I told you the first most used is the guillotine trimmer for Tim Holtz, and this I believe is my second most. And you can tell this is battered, and I've used it all the time. So it is probably 5 years old, if not more, and it still works great. I haven't had any problems. Sometimes you'll have trouble. Your magnets are so strong they want to stick to each other, so you have to be careful that you don't break a magnet with them trying to get stuck to each other, which is why I have the tape around each magnet so that I can pick it up a little bit easier, and I'm not going to have it fly off and stick to the other magnet and accidentally break. So just FYI. So with these layered stamps, they have a certain way that they go, and they fit on the image just perfectly. And then once you've got them lined up, it's nice to know that you're going to be able to stamp in exactly this position, because your paper's held down and your stamp will be on the stamp platform. So you know it's going to stamp the same every single time, especially if you did multiple images. It's really helpful. So I'm taking my second color in that pack of 4, and I'm going to ink up this second layer. This is Pinkalicious, and so I'm going to ink it up, and this is going to create the second layer on this flower, which I think you're going to be quite amazed at how good this looks. I mean, I'm not doing anything super special. I'm just stamping with these layered stamps. It looks so good. Here's the final. Awesome. And it has other layers, so I can add even more detail to this, but I just wanted you to see how easy it is if you wanted to stamp multiples, and also check out these inks. I'm going to talk about some other colored inks that are out there and let you know kind of what I think you might want to invest in. There are so many different inks out there, but when you're getting started, you need a set that's got colors that you can use. And what I really love about these Catherine Pooler inks is that they come in these mini sizes, and they come with, like, you could get a pastel rainbow, you could get a bright colored rainbow, you get all coordinated colors so that you don't have the guesswork of figuring out which colors go with each other. So that's very nice about these Catherine Pooler inks. The other thing that is very nice is that you can print off a color wheel from their website. This is perfectly free. You just print it off and you put a little brad in the middle so it turns, and this helps if you are wanting to mix and match your sets. It will let you know what colors match each other, and it just gives you a lot of variety. So these, all inks have their own qualities, but some things about these inks are that I feel like it could save you the cost of buying colored cardstock that matches. I'm always in search of something that matches what I have stamped, and with these types of ink, you can actually use them to color the background just by swiping the ink. So let me show you what I'm talking about and how this can help you save a little bit of money on buying colored cardstock. So with this color, you just take an ink pad, swipe it, and then you can cut images out of that. You could use it as your background. It just gives you a lot of options, and she's got very bright saturated colors, which is something that I love, because you can always decrease how much color a ink has, but it's hard to get even more color. You can stamp it multiple times or something like that, but it's just a nice, great color. So this you could easily do your own if you didn't have any stamps and you just wanted to do bright colors. You could cut out shapes. So I'm going to cut out a heart and just show you how you can't really tell that this is not colored cardstock. It's a swipe of an ink pad, and it is difficult to tell that that is what is going on. I do see a couple little lines that show me where I swiped, but I also kind of like how those look. If you don't want those there, you could use a blending brush and blend out the lines, and it would just be a solid color. But see how that looks? Perfect. So that's something that's an advantage of these kinds of ink pads. They come in sets that are about $35. You do want to buy the refills because you're using so much ink with each of these. So I think with the refills, it might be about $50 for 8 colors. I'm not 100% sure on that. But it gives you a lot of options, and if you are color challenged, like I feel like I was when I was starting out, it really helps. So this is the set of inks from Altenew that I was telling you about. If you're gonna do florals, if you're gonna do lots of layered stamping and very detailed stamping, these are great inks to have. So they come in 4 packs, and so it's the lightest all the way to the darkest, as you can see with these, so that if you've got, you can have up to 4 different layers of your stamps, which some of Altenew's have 2, 3, 4. It's got a lot of different detail that you can add, and your colors are already there. You know the colors go with each other, they're in the same color family, and they're made to layer, which is really nice. So that makes it pretty easy. These ink pads, for 4 of them, they are around $30, and for these I don't feel like you have to immediately get the refills, but you see how this one doesn't change the color of cardstock. So this is the difference in the Catherine Pooler and other ink pads, is that they're not quite as solid and they're not made to use to color the cardstock, but they do have their purpose. Let's talk about your options for what you could put on the front of your card. So we have paper cutters, we have things like that now. Now let's look at stamps versus stencils, especially if you're starting out. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to use a stencil. A stencil is around $8. If it's a layered stencil, it may be up to $15 or $16, but stencils are very inexpensive and you can do so much. I have so many videos on these. I will pop them up. You can emboss paper with them, you can color them, you can heat emboss. There's so many things that once you get started, you'll be amazed at what you can use a simple stencil for. As far as stamps, it's kind of your preference on what type of stamps you like. I would start off with something that covers most of the card. So this is a big flower set from Altenew, and it covers most of the card, which just helps you when you're starting out to create quick cards. You can color this in, you could leave it black and white, you could stamp it on a colored piece of paper. There's so many other options, but sometimes taking up all that space really helps out as a beginner. I'm going to show you some tricks with stencils and what you would need if you decide you're going to invest in stencils versus stamps. And you can see I'm using the mat we've talked about earlier. This is the Waffle Flower Media Mat. I'm going to put my stencil down on this and use it as the background for ink blending. So I usually tape my stencil to this mat. You don't necessarily have to if you're good at holding on to it, but I inadvertently move my stencil if I don't tape it down. So I'm going to tape it down with some washi tape, and then we're going to ink blend, and I'm going to show you ink blending with 2 different tools. The tool on the left, there's several different types of these. I've got the scrapbook.com foam on the top. It's a foam blender, and it has a piece of Velcro where you attach the tip. So you've got the wood base, and then you attach a tip so that you can do different colors. You do need lots of foam so that you've got one for each color. I'm going to use what's called distress oxides. If you are going to do stencils and ink blending, you are going to want to invest in a couple of colors from this line, because this is the best ink blending. I feel like you can ink blend with any of your colors, but this one is really fun. When you see those cool distressed backgrounds, this is what they're using. So with a foam blender, it is not my preferred option. I tend to make foam marks, and I know this is going to shake the camera, but it gets a much darker layer faster with a foam blender. So if you want to go in super dark and have a really dark background, then this is a great way to go. You just got to be careful that you tap off of the paper and then go in and blend. So I can create this lighter color, but I feel like this is kind of hard on my hand. I know that seems weird, and I've talked to you a little bit about things that hurt, especially as we get older, and my hands have a hard time holding this little thing. So for me, it is not my preferred option. It is not very expensive, but blending brushes, even though a little bit more expensive, they're easier to apply. You don't get as dark of a coat on the beginning, but For me, I always like to fade to something really light, and I feel like that's easier with a brush. So you could, of course, put a lot of pressure with this brush and create more darkness, I guess you could say. But if you can tell from the top corner of this where I use that sponge dauber versus where I'm adding layers of ink on the bottom, it is definitely darker with the sponge dauber for me than it is with the brushes. I can get it that dark with a brush, but it's going to take me a lot more time. Still, my preferred method is some sort of brush to brush on stencils. I just feel like I do better with that, but it's definitely personal preference, and the brushes are definitely more expensive. So a set of brushes, depending on what you get, you can actually get some on Amazon. I think they're even called makeup brushes on there, but you can get them at different places. I would say that they probably run you anywhere from $25 to $60 for a set of 4 or 5 of them. So I will link some of them that I really like. But look at how beautiful this background is. All you need to do is put happy birthday or something on this and it would be done. So it's an easy way to create a card if you're not sure about stamps yet. I wanted to show you this Distress Oxide. So these are the ink blending inks. You can stamp with them, but they are reactive to water. So if you're going to watercolor, you just have to be okay with whatever color you stamp, that color bleeds into it. So some people do that as a technique, and I'll show you that really quick. But they can be stamped, but it's just not what most people use these inks for. They tend to be used for the ink blending. So let me show you. It does stamp perfectly fine, especially if you like to have colored outlines for your stamps, but it's a different look. It's more of a distressed look, and it reacts with water. I'm going to show you how this works with water as well. So what I mean by that is I took a spray bottle, and you see those little drops that are lighter? That's what water reactive means. It makes drops, and you can make those drops lighter by soaking up the water and the pigment that rises to the top of the paper, but it just gives you a different look than others. That being said, you can also watercolor with these, but it does take away from your outline. So let me show you what I mean by that. And I'm just doing a brief demonstration, but you see I'm using a water pen, and I can kind of fade that blue into the leaves right there. And this isn't even watercolor paper, so if you have watercolor paper, this is going to be more obvious. But right now I'm just fading that blue color to make this, instead of a white flower, it could be light blue. So just so you know, it's got some options, and it's a great ink to have in your stash if you've got the budget for them. Okay, so we've done a lot of things. We've gotten some backgrounds made. We've put card bases. We've got scissors to cut out images. Now we need to figure out how we're going to stick everything down. So this is called Barely Art Glue, actually spelled like a bear, and I will put it there, but it comes with these little fine tips. It comes with multiple tips that go on the end of the glue, and it's a good size glue tube. So it's a really nice one if you need to put on small embellishments, or if you just want to sparingly use your glue. This one is called Gina Connect glue, and it's going to make larger dots. I'm going to try to zoom in on these so you can see what size it makes in case you're wanting to glue on sequins or something like that. The last adhesive is a double-sided piece of tape, and you can do things like a tape runner, which is pretty inexpensive and easy to use. But if you're going to buy double-sided adhesive tape, I highly suggest getting a very skinny, I think this is 1/8 inch amount, and that's so good on so many different cards. And sometimes you just need to not be using glue, and it just peels, the back peels off, and it's so good at sticking. Now I'm going to show you how these glues and adhesive works and go over what they work best for. I use 2 things to glue big pieces of cardstock. I either use the double-sided adhesive, or I use the Gina Connect glue to glue a base. So right now I'm going to glue this cupcake on, and I want to show you something unique about this glue. Do you see how much I can move it around once I've put it down? That really helps if you're trying to get things level. You've got a little bit of time, and now it's already to the point where I can't really move it, you can see. But you have that like I guess it's 5 to 10 seconds to get something correct. And I love that about Gina K glue, and I love that about liquid glue in general, because sometimes you need to get your items extremely level, and so you've got a ruler or something else you're using there, and you need that little wiggle room to be able to move it around. If you do a double-sided adhesive, you can't do that. And it may be too detailed to notice, but I'm going to use, this is the size, these little clay embellishments are the size of most sequins. And so I used my dot of Gina K. It is coming out from underneath that, so there will be a little circle, versus using this Barely Art glue and putting one of them on there. It doesn't squeeze the glue out. The last thing I'm going to show you, I wish somebody had taken me through understanding different stamps and what would work well as a beginner and what will last you forever. This stamp set is called Beautiful Day by Altenew. It is one of my favorite ones, and the reason that I love it is because if you look at this layering stamp, when you're looking for layered stamps, there's a couple of things that can really make a difference. Having the outline right here means that you could color this in. You don't have to use your layered parts, which is amazing. And this has the outline of the leaves. It has the outline of just some extra things you can put in there, but it also has these layers. So you got a 3-layer stamp, which is going to give a lot of detail. It's a 2-layer on the leaves. So you've got a lot in this one stamp set, and I really think when you're going to spend a lot of money on stamps, especially Altenew, they've got great quality, but I want you to be able to use it in all different ways, and this is one that you can do that with. So I just wanted to say, when you're looking at stamps, look for things. Does it have an outline? Does it just have the layers? How many layers does it have? All of that's going to make a difference in how much you love that stamp. So most people want their cards to say something on the front, and when you're looking for sentiments, which is what you call the writing that's on the front, look at stamp sets that have definite options. So this has one font for a big word, and then it has all these other words you can put with it that are in a different font. That looks so good, and people love using these. So if you did this and you put the big grateful, and then you put for you underneath it, it just gives you a couple of layers of your sentiment. It takes up some space if you're just doing a stenciled background, and looks really good on a card. So something like this, it doesn't have to be this set, but something like this will really help stretch your supplies. Okay, that wraps it up for this video today. Now remember, I've got a beginner series, so make sure you subscribe and hit the notifications button. I would also love it if you gave this a thumbs up. That really helps me out. If you need to know the products that we did, they will be in the description below. So just make sure you check those. Those links are affiliate links. They do give me a small commission if you click on those when you are going to purchase. So I would appreciate your support with that so much. I hope that everybody has a great day. If you have questions, comments, make sure you drop them below. Have a great day. Bye.